It is common in medieval and fantasy media to see soldiers training for war. Often this gets depicted by having a few soldiers sparring with a clash of swords, or archers practicing with a few arrows shot at a target. This gets the job done narratively, but is it really how soldiers would have trained? In this video, we will take a look at how medieval warriors actually prepared for battle. Lead your own armies to war with our sponsor, Field of Glory 2, Medieval. It's a fantastic strategy title that brings tabletop wargaming to the next level on the PC. The game is set in the 11th to 13th centuries with 29 nations, 57 army lists, and over 100 historically accurate unit models. Battle unfolds across a tiled, realistic environment with turn-based gameplay. Controls are simple, but gameplay is incredibly deep as you consider unit organization, combat capabilities, and tactical doctrines in a bid for victory. Field of Glory features 4 historically based campaigns and a dozen handcrafted scenarios representing key battles from the period. Test your mettle as a commander to see if you can outperform history's most famous generals, or try out the custom battle system to explore unlimited what-if scenarios. Either mode is available in multiplayer, so grab a co-commander while you're at it. If this sounds like the game for you, then click the link in the description below to learn more. Providing specifics on how medieval soldiers trained for battle can be difficult given the wide geographical and temporal scope of the era. As one might imagine, things varied from place to place and from time to time. In addition, our historical record can be quite limited, especially when it comes to the affairs of the non-elite members of society who mostly get overlooked by our ancient chroniclers. That being said, we can still provide a general answer to the question at hand by looking at the broader trends of the medieval world. Who were these medieval soldiers, and what were they even training for? When it comes to the who, it must be noted that the vast majority of medieval armies were composed of ad hoc formations of non-professionals. Your generic army would have included a core force of an aristocrat's retinue, which was augmented by non-aristocratic freemen and mercenaries. As for what battle looked like, well, it varied significantly. Most of the time, medieval warfare was of low intensity. Think small forces dealing with local bandits or raiders. Larger conflicts featuring pitched battles and sieges still occurred, but were simply rarer. We cover this topic in greater depth in our episode on How to Raise a Medieval Army, which you should definitely check out as a primer for this video. Suffice to say, each type of warrior would have had a different approach to training for battle. This was a reflection of their socio-economic status and the type of fighting they were expected to be involved in. Let's now cover each of these in greater detail. We will begin with the training of an aristocrat's retinue. On a societal level, medieval aristocrats and gentry placed a great deal of emphasis on their role as warriors, who were expected to both command armies and fight in battle directly. As individuals of great means, they could devote significant resources towards this goal. After all, they had the most money for gear and the most time for martial pursuits in their day-to-day life. Yet this group was certainly not monolithic, and one should expect the retinue to fall along a spectrum of means. A common catch-all term for these warriors is the men-at-arms. This is used by our sources to describe knights and troops of lesser status who were able to afford heavy armor and war horses. In battle, such men were expected to equip themselves as cavalry. However, men-at-arms could also fight dismounted as the situation demanded, such as when holding defensive positions or carrying out sieges. Either on horse or on foot, though, they would often be the ones to bear the brunt of the fighting. Now on to training. A quick note on sourcing here is that we have significantly more reference material from the late medieval period as literacy rates improve and writing of all types gets more popular. For example, we get all sorts of poems, songs, biographies, and technical manuals that reveal how the elites viewed training. In royal courts, it was even a popular trend to display one's wealth and culture by funding the production of books on chivalry. Meanwhile, in medieval Islamic culture, such writings on military topics were so widespread that they became a major genre of Arabic literature, known as Furusiya. So what do we learn from these texts? Well, the body of available evidence largely points to a more personal level of training as opposed to any collective formation drill. That isn't to say it didn't happen at all, just that men-at-arms typically trained as individuals or small groups. So what did this look like? For the aristocracy, young boys would have been encouraged to wrestle, play with swords, and observe their elders. More formal and structured training probably began in their early teens. This would have involved developing a baseline of stamina, endurance, and strength, as indicated in some texts we have on the lives of famous knights. An emphasis on physical training was likely reinforced by the popular book De Re Militari by Vegetius, which references the activities practiced by Roman legionaries. In terms of technical training, it seems that swordsmanship and fencing were key parts of knightly military education. By the late medieval period, people began to write all sorts of technical manuals on the matter. However, these were never the primary mode of instruction. Rather, aristocratic warriors in training would have learned by doing, with older and more experienced warriors tutoring younger swordsmen directly. Additional skills involved learning to ride a horse and perform mounted combat with both sword and lance. In these matters, the popular activity of hunting would have proved quite instructive for learning how to traverse rough terrain, work as a team, and corral a target. Tournaments or jousts also provided aspiring knights a way to practice in a more military setting. Demonstrating skill and prowess could win individuals renown among their peers, adding a level of cultural importance to the practical motivations of becoming better at fighting. At the end of the day, though, this peacetime training could only go so far. Yes, practice was important, but there was no substitute for experiencing war firsthand. To that end, military musters were important occasions for younger soldiers to learn the ropes of how to organize and conduct themselves within a larger force. Most of the time, this would culminate in some smaller action like a skirmish, raid, or minor siege. The big affairs, pitched battles and massive sieges, were rare. For context, we can look at the career of John de Rither, a 66-year-old man-at-arms from the 100 Years' War. Though he had participated in combat from the age of 19, he had only personally fought in 3 large-scale pitched battles. Because hands-on experience was so valuable and major action was so rare, veterans were in high demand when it came to medieval military training. Boys were encouraged to listen to their stories and observe them in action. If these young knights were lucky enough, they might even have a veteran tutor take charge of their instruction. Yet no matter how much practice or direct experience one accumulated, these skills would degrade over time. There was no formalized structure for ongoing military training, which meant that it was up to the individual how much effort they dedicated to maintaining their fighting edge. It's for this reason that some medieval writers advocated for knights to go out and seek foreign wars in peacetime so as to remain at the top of their A-game. We can now talk about the next group of medieval soldiers, the non-aristocratic freemen. This was a diverse group whose combat roles would have varied widely depending on their income. The wealthiest would serve as men-at-arms, riding atop horses in heavy armor, while poorer individuals might fight light cavalry, footmen, or skirmishers. Yet, despite existing at a lower tier on the military pecking order, commoners were often just as proud of their military service and skills as the aristocracy. Even if they had less resources at their disposal, non-aristocratic soldiers still took care to prepare for battle. Medieval freemen were generally required to own weapons. This obligation was scaled to their level of income, with proclamations such as the English Assizes of Arms, spelling out exactly what sort of gear one should own. However, not all could bear arms. Minority groups like Jewish men in Christian areas were often banned from owning weapons and forced to sell off any they possessed. For those who did acquire war gear, the next step would be to familiarize themselves with its use. In this regard, we have a large body of evidence which shows that commoners, especially urban citizens, sought to train and participate in a culture of arms. In many towns and cities across Europe, especially Flanders, shooting guilds for archers, crossbowmen, and gunpowder weapons were common. Members of these prestigious groups participated in peacetime shooting competitions and served their cities in war. Legislation attempted to control such activities and curb any civic disorder which might result from a bunch of commoners adopting weapons. Late medieval England famously required freemen to practice archery, with towns being obliged to maintain publicly accessible archery targets. The purpose of these laws was both to encourage training and attempt to reduce public disorder by banning gambling and other morally suspect pastimes. As we discussed with the aristocratic soldiers, most training was achieved through practical experience in combat. Big battles were rare, and so veterans again proved key in sharing their knowledge with the wider group of trainees. Some communities attempted to make up for the lack of real combat through mock battles. Italian cities, for instance, carried out little battles or shield games, where combat was fought using shields and blunt batons. By the late medieval period, however, these communal games had fallen out of favor as armed forces became more professionalized. The last element of the medieval army we will talk about are the mercenaries. Such hired troops were a vital part of medieval military forces, since most states at the time had few standing forces and limited resources to expand their pool of effective soldiers. Many soldiers, identified by our sources as mercenaries, were actually provided as part of a political alliance or treaty, especially in the early Middle Ages. The stereotypical image of medieval mercenaries depicted in most media comes primarily from the later medieval period, when larger groups of free companies were indeed available for hire, especially in 14th and 15th century Italy. Regarding their composition, mercenaries were drawn from the same range of backgrounds as normal medieval soldiers. That is to say, both aristocrats and commoners became mercenaries, and they almost all began their military careers fighting in more local conflicts before venturing further afield to find employment in arms. Veteran mercenaries could command more money for their services, and experienced soldiers often turned to mercenary work as a means of leveraging their hard-won experience when the original conflict they had been mobilized to fight in was over. In terms of training, these mercenaries would have practiced in similar ways to the aristocrats and freemen we previously described. However, owing to their profession, they would end up getting most of their training from ongoing participation in warfare. As such, medieval mercenaries were both valued and feared for their experience. Notorious mercenaries could then leverage this reputation to great effect. For example, the Englishman Sir John Hawkwood apparently struck such fear into the heart of opponents in 14th century Italy that he could demand their surrender without having to risk open battle. Other famous figures, such as Johannes Lichtenauer or Joachim Meyer, might be hired as weapons instructors or lead fencing schools. Yet men who pursued careers in violence were often viewed with suspicion by medieval authorities. Thus, we have seen how the three main types of warriors in a medieval army trained for battle. There will be much more to cover when it comes to discussing how these elements came together and trained to fight as a cohesive whole, but that will have to wait for another time. For now, I hope this episode has proved both enlightening and entertaining. A huge thanks is owed to our supporters on Patreon and to the researchers, writers, and artists who made this video possible. Stay tuned for more episodes on medieval history and let us know what you want to see covered next. See you in the next one.